Have you ever wondered, can a hand truly heal, not through magic or supernatural miracles, but through kindness, compassion, and the smallest acts we give away each day? Today, Moonlitwest will tell you the story of a man once praised by an entire nation for his kindness, yet he chose to live a quiet life away from the spotlight. What made him leave? Does kindness truly exist unconditionally, or is there always a hidden motive behind it? And more importantly, can it transform a skeptic into someone who understands? Let your mind relax, take a sip of warm tea, and listen to the rhythm of the story. And if you love meaningful stories like this, don't forget to like and subscribe to help Moonlitwest reach its first 123 subscribers. Your support is the greatest motivation for us to continue bringing even better stories. Now, let's step into the story. The Hand That Heals. The early morning sun gently draped over the town like a thin golden blanket, stretching across the old wooden rooftops and the narrow brick-paved streets, worn down by time. The wind swept through the barren maple trees, carrying the chill of late autumn, making the last remaining leaves tremble before surrendering to the ground. A small cafe nestled humbly at the corner of the street, its warm light spilling from fogged-up windows, reflecting the silhouettes of those inside, each carrying their own story, their own burdens. Noah Sullivan pulled his wool coat tighter around him as he walked slowly along the street, his mind tangled in conflicting thoughts. A few days ago, he had received an assignment from the editorial office to write an interview piece about Walter Reeves, a man once celebrated as a symbol of kindness through a beloved children's television program, who had now stepped away from the limelight to live a simple life. To Noah, stories of kindness always carried a certain ambiguity. People, he believed, never acted selflessly out of pure compassion. There was always a reason, a hidden motive, no matter how subtle. He had seen a charity raise millions of dollars, only to quietly funnel most of it into secret accounts. A politician, widely praised for his generosity, had merely been crafting his image to gain more votes. Even his own neighbor, always appearing with a friendly smile, had eventually been arrested for scamming elderly residents in the neighborhood. All these experiences had made Noah wary and skeptical of the good deeds people displayed. He had witnessed enough tales of deception disguised as benevolence throughout his years as an investigative journalist. This time, he expected nothing different. The old bus came to a stop in front of a small post office, and Noah stepped off, his gaze scanning the surroundings. The town had an unusual sense of peace, yet something about it felt as though time was gradually swallowing it whole. Small shops with faded signs, empty park benches, and an eerie stillness where even the sound of the wind whispering through narrow alleys could be heard. From what Noah had gathered, Walter Reeves lived in a modest house at the end of the main road, near a still lake that mirrored the grayish blue sky. The house itself was unremarkable, a weathered porch, a white picket fence and with peeling paint, and a small garden where a few yellow chrysanthemums stretched toward the crisp air. There was no trace of the glamour that once surrounded a famous figure, only the quiet and unassuming presence of a life that had endured its share of ups and downs. Noah stood there for a moment, taking in the small town, wondering what had led a man like Walter Reeves to leave behind the glory of fame and retreat into such solitude. He didn't believe in stories that were too perfect. Kindness was not always as pure as it seemed, but no matter how skeptical he was, he knew he couldn't write this article without stepping into Walter Reeves's world. He needed to uncover the truth in his own way. Noah recalled the editorial meeting a few days prior when the editor-in-chief had placed a thin file in front of him with an enigmatic look. "Walter Reeves," the man had said, slowly flipping through the pages. "A man once praised by the entire nation, a man of kindness, but now no one talks about him anymore." Noah crossed his arms, leaning back in his chair, his skepticism evident. "So what do you want me to do? Write a tribute piece?" The editor-in-chief raised an eyebrow, giving him a subtle smile. "I want you to find out who he really is. We have an untold story about Walter Reeves, and I think you're the right person to uncover it." Noah didn't need to hear more. He understood exactly what his superior meant. Either this would be an inspiring story about a good man forgotten by the world, or it would turn into an investigative expose, revealing an entirely different truth, a darker side the public had never seen. And if there was one thing Noah firmly believed, it was that everyone had a hidden side. No one could be flawlessly good. He had taken the file, flipping through the old photographs and newspaper clippings. Vague memories of the children's television program Walter Reeves had hosted resurfaced. The smiles, the gentle lessons, a man beloved by an entire generation. And yet, like so many others, he had disappeared from public life without a clear explanation. Why? Noah had accepted the assignment, not because he believed in Reeves's goodness, but because he wanted to know what truly lay behind his disappearance. Now, standing in the middle of this small town, his skepticism only grew. The scenery around him was too peaceful, almost unnervingly still. Narrow streets, aging storefronts, people moving without haste. It all felt like a place detached from the fast-paced world beyond. There was no way a man once recognized nationwide would willingly choose to spend the rest of his life here unless he had something to hide. Noah took a deep breath, pulling his collar up against the sharp wind. He hadn't come here to chase a heartwarming tale. He had come to find the truth. He walked slowly along the dirt path leading to the small house, each step pulling him deeper into a landscape of suspicion. When the wooden door creaked open, Walter Reeves stood there, silent, his demeanor calm, as if he had been expecting him. His eyes carried a strange warmth, completely at odds with the picture Noah had drawn in his mind. "You must be Sullivan," Reeves said with a slight smile, his voice deep and soothing, carrying the weight of years of patience and understanding. Noah nodded, trying to mask his fleeting sense of unease in front of the older man. He wasn't like the powerful figures Noah had interviewed before. There was no air of grandeur, no exaggerated presence, no remnants of a man once accustomed to the spotlight, just an unassuming old man with calloused hands and a steady stance. They stepped inside, and almost immediately, Noah noticed something unusual. The silence here wasn't forced or heavy. It was peaceful, not needing to be filled with hurried words. Reeves poured tea into 2 old porcelain cups, his movements so deliberate that it felt as though he wasn't just making tea, but preparing for something much more significant. Noah flipped open his notebook, ready to begin the interview in his usual manner, but before he could ask his first question, Reeves gently set his teacup down and looked at him with quiet curiosity. "Why do you do this work, Noah?" The question caught him off guard, making him pause. He had never considered being interviewed in return. This wasn't how interviews typically went, but there was no challenge in Reeves's gaze, only a genuine sense of interest. Noah smirked, hiding his momentary hesitation. "I write for the truth," he answered curtly, yet as the words left his lips, even he felt they sounded more hollow than usual. Walter Reeves nodded, but made no comment, simply lifting his cup again, taking a slow sip as if waiting for Noah to reflect on his own response. The air in the room grew dense, not from tension, but from Noah realizing this conversation wouldn't be as straightforward as he had expected. But he wasn't easily fooled. Throughout his career, Noah had encountered countless people skilled at concealing the truth behind a flawless facade. Politicians who mastered the art of deception, philanthropists who manipulated finances, public figures who wore a mask of morality while hiding secrets they couldn't afford to let slip. Walter Reeves could be just like them, a man once celebrated by an entire country, only to suddenly vanish. There had to be something suspicious about that. Noah took a sip of tea, masking the unease creeping into his mind. He was used to controlling interviews, steering conversations in his direction, but Reeves wasn't following the usual script. He wasn't rushing to defend himself, wasn't making grand statements about his past. He simply sat there, observing Noah with an almost unsettling patience. Well, Noah decided to change tactics. He flipped through his notebook slightly, keeping his voice professionally composed. "You were once a great figure, but then you suddenly walked away from it all. There must have been a reason." Walter Reeves smiled faintly, setting his cup of tea down. "What reason do you think I had?" The question thrown back at him made Noah frown slightly. This was a tactic often used by those with experience, to make the other person reveal their own thoughts instead. But he wasn't going to fall for that. Many people believe that when someone leaves the spotlight, it's either because they have something to hide or because they're no longer useful. What do you think? Walter Reeves didn't answer immediately. He observed Noah for a moment, as if considering whether to reveal something. Then he simply said, "Not everyone needs a stage to have meaning." Noah wasn't satisfied with that answer. He wanted more, something deeper, a hidden flaw, a sign of pretense. He tried a different approach. "There are rumors that you still help people in this town, that you're a man of kindness. But I wonder, have you ever done it for another reason? For the feeling of being admired? To atone for something in your past?" Reeves smiled again, but there was no offense in it, no defensiveness. "Do you think kindness always requires a motive?" Noah was silent. A part of him wanted to nod, but in that moment, he realized he wasn't as certain as before. This interview wasn't going the way he had expected. Reeves wasn't justifying himself, wasn't arguing. He was simply reflecting Noah's own thoughts back at him, forcing him to question himself. Noah leaned in slightly, his gaze sharp. "So, you've never doubted yourself? Never felt like what you do is meaningless?" Walter Reeves let out a soft sigh, unbothered by the pressure of the question. "Everyone has moments of doubt, Noah. But what matters isn't whether we doubt. It's what we choose to do afterward. I don't help people to be recognized. I help because I believe it's the right thing to do." Noah remained still. Reeves's answers didn't completely satisfy his skepticism, but they weren't empty words either. These weren't rehearsed lines crafted to cover something up. This interview was unlike any he had conducted before. It wasn't just about asking questions and getting answers. It was shifting something inside him, though he didn't want to admit it. He met a shopkeeper who said that Reeves often bought excess groceries to deliver to struggling families. A mechanic told him about the time Reeves had helped a lost child find his way home, patiently sitting with the boy until his parents arrived. An elderly woman who lived next door spoke of cold nights when Reeves quietly left a stack of firewood outside her door. All of these stories sounded too perfect, and that only made Noah more suspicious. No one could truly be this good. He decided to dig deeper, searching for the smallest details that might reveal signs of deception. But the more he searched, the more he found himself lost in a maze with no exit, no hidden bank accounts, no financial scandals, no dark past swept under the rug. Every piece of evidence about Walter Reeves painted the picture of a man who genuinely lived for others, not for fame, not for glory, but simply because that's who he was. A strange discomfort began to stir in Noah. He had come here expecting to expose another side of the story, but the only truth he had uncovered was one he didn't know how to face. Maybe not everyone had an ulterior motive behind their kindness. Maybe people like Walter Reeves really did exist. Reeves wasn't just a subject to be interviewed. He was someone who truly listened, and that made Noah feel more exposed than ever. Noah woke up early the next morning, partly because of the birds chirping outside his window, partly because he hadn't slept well. Something about his conversation with Walter Reeves still lingered in his mind. The old man's answers, his unnerving calmness. It all made Noah feel like he wasn't just investigating a man, but being drawn into a current of thoughts he hadn't anticipated. He spent the morning walking around town, stopping at a small cafe where locals seemed used to seeing an old man, quietly sipping tea in the corner, always ready to talk to anyone who needed to be heard. But when Noah asked about Walter Reeves's family, no one mentioned anyone other than the man himself. That only made him more curious. Finally, an elderly woman, the owner of a small grocery store across from the cafe, shared something that few seemed to remember. He had a son once, she said, her voice distant, as if pulling the memory from deep within. But he left a long time ago. No one speaks of him anymore. Noah narrowed his eyes. A son? This was the first he had heard of it. Not a single article had ever mentioned Walter Reeves having a child. In all the information Noah had gathered, there was no mention of family at all. But why? A man who had spent his life helping children had never spoken about his own son? A surge of thoughts raced through Noah's mind. If Walter Reeves had left something untold, then this could be the key to understanding everything. A story about kindness couldn't be entirely without shadows. Maybe, finally, he had found a crack in the perfect picture. When Noah returned to the small house by the lake, Walter Reeves was sitting on the old wooden bench on the porch, his eyes following the gentle ripples on the water. He didn't seem surprised to see Noah approaching, as if he had already known. He would return with a more important question. Noah stood there for a moment, torn between asking directly or finding a more subtle way to approach the topic. But then he decided not to dance around it. "I heard you have a son," he said, carefully watching Walter Reeves's expression. "But it seems he's been away from you for a long time." Reeves didn't answer immediately. A light breeze passed through, carrying the late afternoon chill. Finally, he gave a small nod, and for the first time, Noah saw a deep sadness in his eyes. "Yes," he said, his voice devoid of avoidance or surprise. "I have a son. His name is Daniel." That name hung in the air, like a long-buried secret, finally spoken again. Noah remained silent, waiting for him to continue. Daniel was a bright, strong boy with a kind heart, Walter Reeves said, his gaze distant, as if looking into a past only he still held on to. "But I hurt him in a way I can never undo." He paused, as if the next words were too heavy to say. Noah sensed a quiet tension in the air, a feeling he had come to recognize when digging into stories that were not easy to tell. "Back then, I thought that if I could help more people, do something meaningful for society, then that would be the best way to live a purposeful life." Reeves continued, "But I was so caught up with strangers, the children watching me through the screen, that I forgot my own son needed a father too." Noah frowned. This wasn't what he had expected. He had thought he would uncover some dark secret, some grave mistake. But what Reeves had just said carried a different kind of sorrow, not one born from deceit, but from absence, a loss where no one was truly at fault. Daniel grew up feeling like I was never really there, Walter Reeves said, his voice quieter. And when he was old enough to make his own decisions, he left. No resentment, no anger. He simply wanted to live a life without me in it. A cold shiver ran down Noah's spine. He looked at the man before him, once celebrated by an entire nation, now sitting there with a wound that would never heal. Did you ever try to reach out to him? Noah asked, his voice unconsciously softer than before. Walter Reeves gave a small, accepting smile. I tried, but you can't force someone to forgive before they're ready. All I can do is hope that one day he finds a reason to come back. A long silence stretched between them. There were no tears, no dramatic confessions, just the quiet weight of things lost. And in that moment, something cracked open inside Noah. He thought about his own parents, the missed calls he never returned, the times they asked about his life, and he brushed them off. The holidays he chose work over going home. He had always believed those things didn't matter, that his job had more meaning, that distance was just a natural part of growing up. But now, standing in front of Walter Reeves, hearing him speak of a son who had walked away, Noah realized he was walking the same path. A strange emptiness settled in him. He was no longer sure about the things he had once believed. Maybe kindness didn't need a motive, and maybe family mattered more than he had ever thought. Noah sat on the old wooden chair in Walter Reeves's small living room. Outside, the sky was darkening, the golden light from the window casting long shadows across the floor. A peculiar silence filled the space, broken only by the slow ticking of an old clock on the wall. He didn't rush to stand up, nor did he open his notebook like he usually would. Their conversation had lasted longer than he expected, but the strangest thing was, he no longer cared about uncovering a sensational story or some hidden truth. Walter Reeves remained at the corner of the table, his hands resting around a cup of tea that had long gone cold. He didn't speak for a while, only watching Noah with a calm gaze, as if waiting for him to find something on his own, something that didn't need to be said out loud. Finally, he spoke, his voice low, but cutting through the storm of thoughts in Noah's mind. Noah, I want you to do something. Noah looked up, waiting. For just 1 minute, think about the people who have loved you, even in the smallest moments. He frowned slightly, not understanding why Reeves was asking this of him. This wasn't the kind of psychological game he was used to, but something in the way Reeves spoke made it impossible to dismiss outright. Noah took a deep breath, leaning back in his chair, his eyes following the flickering light on the ceiling. At first, his mind was blank. as if he had never had a beautiful memory worth recalling. But then, like ripples forming on the surface of a lake, the images began to emerge, little by little. He remembered summer afternoons as a child, when his father patiently fixed his old bicycle every time he broke it. His father never scolded him, just quietly wiped the grease from his hands and said, "Be more careful next time, son." But every time, he still fixed it, without a word of complaint. He remembered the nights when his mother sat beside his bed, gently stroking his hair when he had a fever. Her eyes were filled with worry, but she always smiled to reassure him. He remembered the smell of hot soup whenever he was sick, never realizing as a child that she had stayed up all night to take care of him. He remembered the day he first moved to the city to pursue journalism, how his parents had stood there at the train station, waving goodbye. They didn't cry, didn't try to hold him back, just reminded him that if he ever felt tired, he could always come home. But he had never gone back. Noah closed his eyes, a strange feeling rising in his chest, something like regret, yet also filled with a warmth he had long ignored. Walter Reeves remained silent, watching without pressuring him, without rushing. He knew that the most important realizations never came from force. They could only be found when someone was ready to face themselves. When Noah opened his eyes again, he felt as if he had traveled a long distance without ever leaving his chair. Something had shifted inside him, though no one had spoken it out loud. He slowly placed his cup of tea down, his gaze pensive. "I had forgotten," he murmured, as if speaking more to himself than to Walter Reeves. "I had forgotten about all of that for a long time." Walter nodded, as if he had known this all along. "Kindness, Noah, isn't always about grand gestures," he said. "Sometimes it's simply the moments when someone was there for us, when we needed them most. But sometimes we get so caught up in the world outside that we forget the smallest, yet most important things." Noah didn't respond. He no longer had anything to argue about. Skepticism had been his guiding principle, but now he wasn't sure he wanted to hold on to it so tightly. Outside, the lake reflected the glow of the newly lit street lamps, shimmering like scattered fragments of memory. Noah suddenly felt as if he were seeing everything with different eyes, eyes that had been cleansed of old prejudices. He didn't know how long he had been sitting there, but when he finally stood up to leave, he felt much lighter than when he had arrived. "Do you think Daniel will come back?" he asked before stepping out the door. Walter Reeves gave a soft smile, one that was gentle yet unwavering. "I don't know," he said, "but I will always leave the door open." Noah nodded and excused himself, feeling that the interview had come to an end. Noah sat in his small rented room in town, the light from his desk lamp casting a glow over the blank pages in front of him. His laptop was open beside him, the screen showing an empty document. waiting for words to be typed. But he didn't start writing right away. Instead, he quietly looked through his notes, the sharp questions he had prepared, the skeptical angles he had planned to explore. Now, they all felt foreign to him. He had come here expecting to expose a different story, believing that behind every act of kindness lay a hidden motive. But what he had found wasn't a secret, nor a hidden darkness waiting to be uncovered. What he had found was himself. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, and then he began to type, not an investigative piece filled with sharp arguments or sensational doubts, not a simple interview recounting Walter Reeves's answers, but a story about a quiet man who had changed the way he saw the world. He wrote about how Walter Reeves never tried to justify himself or convince him of anything. He simply lived the way he believed was right, without needing to prove it, without needing anyone's validation. He wrote about the moment Walter had asked him to take a minute to think about the people who had loved him and how that simple request had made him remember the precious memories he had long chosen to forget. He wrote about kindness, not as something grand that needed embellishment, but as something simple, like a warm cup of tea on a cold winter's day, like a reminder that sometimes we need to slow down to truly see the meaningful things around us. As he typed the final lines, Noah paused for a moment, taking a deep breath. He had finished the article, but there was something else, something he knew he needed to do right now. He opened the contacts on his phone, tapping on a number he hadn't called in years. The call connected, and for a few seconds, he almost wanted to hang up. But then, a familiar, slightly raspy voice came through the line. Noah? His heart clenched. It had been so long since he had last heard that voice. Dad, it's me. A brief silence. Then his father's voice came again, not with reproach, not with resentment, just quiet surprise and warmth that Noah hadn't realized he still remembered. Are you doing okay? Noah smiled softly, feeling for the first time in years that the distance between them had faded. I'm okay. I just wanted to check in on you. On the other end, his father didn't respond right away, but Noah could feel something gentle in the silence between them, something that filled each breath of this conversation, and for the first time in a long time, he let himself truly listen. The next day, as Noah left the town, the sky was clear and the late autumn breeze felt lighter against his skin. He stood outside the small house by the lake, looking at the window where Walter Reeves sat, a book in his hands. Reeves didn't notice him standing there, but somehow he didn't need to. Noah knew that whether people came or went, whether they remembered him or forgot, Walter Reeves would continue living as he always had, quietly helping those around him in the simplest ways, without seeking recognition, without needing fame or the spotlight. On the road back, Noah wasn't carrying the skepticism or sharp analysis he once had. What he carried was a story he knew wouldn't just change the way he wrote, but the way he saw life itself. Because sometimes what we need isn't an answer, but a moment to look back at ourselves. And that is today's story about kindness, about forgiveness, and about the small moments that have the power to change a person. Sometimes we spend so much time searching for answers to grand questions that we forget the simplest things are what truly heal the soul. If this story resonated with you in some way, don't forget to like and subscribe to help Moonlitwest reach its first 123 subscribers, and more importantly, take a little time each day to cherish yourself and those around you. Now, let your mind relax, set aside your worries, and drift into a peaceful sleep. Wishing you a restful night. Take care, and don't forget to return tomorrow at bedtime for another story. Moonlitwest, where stories touch the heart. Good night.